She slowly started grinning. I promise not to leave my panties hanging on the shower rod too often. Often? I find myself very tired now. Honey, where do I sleep? Your bed, I hope? She was only semi-joking. I led her to the guest room. I had forgotten I made every piece of furniture in the room, from the dressers to the large canopy bed, all in light pecan. I'd learned to carve, and the posts of the bed were done in intricate patterns, vines, and little flowers mostly. There was even a vanity, the mirror in the shape of a heart. I'd made it with a little girl in mind. She wandered around, touching everything. Finally, she turned and smiled. What's her name? Who? What's her name? You obviously designed this room for a daughter. I assume you had a name picked out? Oh no, I always thought when I married, we would pick the name out together, something that appealed to both of us. It wouldn't be fair otherwise. Tears welled up once again. She came over, grabbed me, and gave me a very, very nice kiss. I have the feeling you'll be an excellent father. Good night, Jamie. I stood and watched her for a second before telling her good night. Movement woke me. I looked at the clock, for in the morning. I wondered what I had heard until I saw her at the foot of the bed. I freaked for a minute before I remembered she was still in the house. Are you all right? In answer, she dove on the bed, soaking my shoulder with tears. No, I'm not all right. Can I stay here for a bit? I need to feel loving arms around me, at least for a little while. I'll go back to my room when I calm down. I pushed the covers back, and she snuggled in, her head on my shoulder. She smelled great, and she felt wonderful. I went to sleep with my arm wrapped around her. I woke at 8, and she was still there, still snuggled tightly, her head still on my shoulder, and my other arm was wrapped around her waist, pulling her to me tightly. I lay and looked at her, thinking how beautiful she was without makeup, her hair spread out in a messy fashion. 15 minutes later, one eye popped open. How long have you been staring at me? A little while, and I wasn't staring, more like admiring. JY grinned and stretched, sliding that sensuous body along my length. I popped hard instantly, and she felt it. She pushed me away, giggling, I'm ready for breakfast. We showered separately, although the thought of that naked body just on the other side of that door did nothing to make my erection go down. I had to stand under the cold water while I had my shower just to gain control. Jen had been busy, pots and pans were everywhere. She wouldn't let me help, so I sipped coffee and admired her as she flitted from task to task. Jen had made crepes, and they were excellent. Where did you learn to do that? Paris? I spent 3 months in a compressed cooking course. We prepared dishes for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. One of the many reasons I was incommunicado. She cooked, so I cleaned up while she sipped coffee. I hand-washed the large items and prepped the rest for the dishwasher. Are you always this neat? Yeah, Uncle Sam taught me. And since I live alone, it's pretty easy to keep the place clean if you don't let things pile up. She changed subjects quickly. Why aren't you married, Jamie? You might as well wear a t-shirt that says a prime husband material. Honestly, I haven't found anyone I loved enough to consider marriage. I'm like a lot of animals, I intend to mate for life, so I have to be damn sure. I was in love with a woman once, but nothing came of it. Why not? Because she was married to someone else. If I had pursued her, talked her into cheating on her husband, it would have never worked. How could I trust someone who would do that to another who was supposed to be the love of her life? If she had, could I respect her? It's a shame because she was just about as perfect as a wife could be. Jen blushed, realizing I was talking about her. Then she grinned. What shall we do today? What do you usually do on Sundays? I usually go to church or go fishing. You go to church? That surprises you? Not really, although I've never heard you talk about religion. I usually don't, and I don't try to recruit others to my way of thinking. Is it too late to go? I checked the time. It's too late for Sunday school, but we have time to get there for the sermon if you dress quickly enough. She giggled as she moved. I was a fashion model, there are professional quick change artists out there slower than me. 10 minutes and you better be ready. I shaved and checked my closet, choosing an old suit, not wanting to wear one of Steve's and bring up memories. True to her word, she was ready before I was. She was dressed simply, in a knee-length dress with a high neckline, but the woman could make a potato sack look good. Heads turned, and conversation slowed. I was greeted by my friends and introduced Jen, and then the sermon started. I liked the preacher we had now quite a bit. He was a much calmer person than the one that preceded him. That guy was all hellfire and damnation. It wasn't long before we thought him unstable. He found out we were talking to the governing board about maybe transferring him and had a meltdown in the pulpit. The next sermon was almost impossible to understand, ending when he pulled a pistol out and started ranting about how we'd never replace him. It was a very tense 20 minutes before the CS got there in force. An usher had slipped out and called them the minute the gun appeared. Negotiators were called, a SWAT team showed up, then the news media. 2 deputies were quietly crawling among the pews, getting the children out while the negotiator kept his attention. Another usher unlocked the back door, and the police got close enough to taser him, waiting until he waved the gun in the air, a good thing because when the jaws hit him, he fired twice in reflex. Come to find out, he was having a mental breakdown triggered by the death of his wife and a dependency on prescription drugs. The church managed to get the charges reduced and get him into rehab. He sent a nice, long letter of apology later from his new posting in Africa, a place he volunteered to go to atone for his sins. You could look up if you're in the right pew and see the outlines of the patching over the bullet holes. The sermon was about marriage commitment and the pressures of modern living and how to deal with it and stay firm in your commitment. Commitment to marriage should be second only to your commitment to God. Strong, loving relationships are the cornerstone of modern society, the place of strength after your faith in God, and just like God, you should always, always be there for your partner. I saw a lot of nodding and a lot of uncomfortable people. JY seemed to be hanging on every word. Most people were surprised that as we filed out, he gathered Jen up into a big hug. Turning her loose, he grinned. You don't remember me, do you? I'm Mike Flanagan's father. I don't have words to express how much your help has meant to our family. I speak of you often, telling people you are proof that angels walk on this earth. Jen was flaming red but smiled. It was just a little thing I could do to help. How is your son doing? He's fine, in total remission. The surgeon seems satisfied they got it all. He's to the point he's back with the fire department, although they won't let him do anything strenuous yet. So, this was the angel he spoke about so often. He told us about it, how his son was dying, and even as he prayed, he was giving up hope when an angel appeared before him, telling him his son would be all right. Faster than he could understand, his son was on a medical jet to a major cancer center and in surgery in less than 10 hours. There was never any discussion of cost, and he never saw a medical bill. He called it a modern-day miracle. He thanked me for bringing her to church so he could finally express the gratitude he felt, asking if she lived nearby. Jen stepped in before I could answer. I'm living with Jamie right now, Reverend. Unfortunately, it isn't in sin, but I'm working on it. The preacher got a little red, but grinned. Well, before it gets that far, think about my sermon today. I've never officiated at the wedding of an angel. JY promised to give it serious consideration and she would get back to him. I grinned at her as we drove home. What? I've never slept with an angel before. I thought the glow last night was from my neighbor's street lamp. I have to say, it was very nice. Jen colored slightly before grinning back. Oh, I can be a real little devil when I backslide. That only happens when I'm in love, but when it happens, it burns hotter than any nuclear bomb ever detonated. What shall we have for lunch? We stopped at the country club. I knew the chef, and they usually put on a pretty good buffet. Once again, the place went quiet when we entered. I figure sooner or later, I'll get used to it. The food was excellent, and she surprised me with how full her plate was. Michelle came out and walked among the patrons, stopping at our table. Soon, they were in a rapid-fire discussion I couldn't have kept up with if it was in English, much less the French they were speaking. He kissed her on both cheeks, told me he thought I was the luckiest man alive, and continued circulating. What was that all about? Food, honey, we were speaking food. He really is quite good. I wondered about the honey comment but let it go. We went home, oddly me saying that, at least mentally, and she insisted I finish my rocking chair project. I'm not here to disrupt your life. I have a few things to do, and maybe I'll join you, and maybe I can help if you'll let me. She grabbed her laptop out of her vehicle and disappeared into the spare bedroom. I was almost finished dry-fitting everything when she came into the shop 2 hours later. She sat on a stool and watched for a few minutes before coming over and giving me a hand. I was grateful for the help. Sometimes you needed 3 hands on these projects. When everything was in place, we stood back, her admiring it while I looked for flaws. The seat was a bit uneven on one corner, so before I glued everything up, I'd have to fix that. One of the back spindles looked a little off, and I might have to adjust the length so it would seat better, but other than that, it looked good. Jen helped as I gently took it apart, laying the pieces out on a long table. I took the seat over to the sander and adjusted it. Then I measured the hole, took a little off the bottom of the spindle in question, and it was ready to glue up. I was going to stain the parts first, that way, I could get a good even coat and it would make the whole thing more durable. Not quite sure how dark to make it, I asked her opinion. What does the rest of the furniture in your house look like? Excellent question. Sarah had mostly upholstered pieces, but the few pieces of wood furniture I remembered had a medium tint. I got out 3 different stains and a scrap piece of wood, rubbing a bit of each on the board. Jen pointed to the lightest one without hesitation. This one. It'll make the grain of the wood really stand out. She wanted to help, but I discouraged it. Most beginners put too much on at one time, and it darkens it more than we want. Take the scrap piece and practice if you like, or watch me. Jen watched for a while, then grabbed a pair of rubber gloves and played with the scrap while I finished. There wasn't a bare spot left when she was done, but I had to admit she caught on quicker than most beginners. She glowed under my praise. For hours later, right before bedtime, I glued everything up and clamped the chair. In 24 hours, I would check the glue, and if I felt it was set, I'd take the clamps off. If not, I'd leave it at least another day. We went to bed separately, and I was so tired I didn't realize she had slipped in until I woke the next morning. She felt so good, I just held her until I had to get up to make it to work on time. I grinned all day at work, even the most aggravating subcontractor I had didn't bother me, which I think bothered him. My good mood lasted until I got home to find a really pissed off female waiting for me. Why didn't you wake me up? I thought you might like to sleep in. You need to let me do the thinking around here. One look at my face, and she knew she had made a mistake. I am sorry, honey, that came out all wrong. What I meant to say is that I wanted to get up with you, maybe even cook you some breakfast. Is that so bad? I appreciate the thought. I live by myself, remember? I'm used to taking care of myself. Her frown deepened. I understand. It's just that I like to pull my own weight, I don't want to be a burden. I eyed her, remembering the first few times I'd been around her, she could barely find her way to the kitchen and couldn't cook for diddly, her maid did most of the meals for them. Something was starting to smell. JY changed the subject. Look, I made dinner. Well, by golly, she had, and it smelled great. She beamed when I told her. It's not quite done, another hour should do it. I took advantage of the time to go over the rocking chair one more time, deciding it was as done as it was ever going to get. I called Sarah. Come by tomorrow and pick up your chair. She was so happy, she was still gushing when I hung up. Dinner was excellent, probably the best meal I'd ever had. I noticed a bouquet of flowers in random places, and she smiled. I picked them out of your garden. I hope you don't mind. Mind? Pick all you want. I used them to bait pollinators in for the vegetables, but decided I like them so much, I seem to plant more every year. It's a shame, really. Lots just go to waste. I'm sure there are people out there who would enjoy a bunch from time to time. The next day, she went to a craft store and bought a bunch of vases and some ribbon. She called Jan first, outlined her idea, and Jan immediately endorsed it. She was in the garden when I got home Friday with 5-gallon buckets and garden shears. Every bucket was filled with flowers. She waved me over. I hope you were sincere when you said you wished others could enjoy the beauty of your flowers. I called in a pizza because we're going to be too busy to cook. Now, if you'll finish the buckets, I'll start arranging. There were 25 vases, and she must have had some experience because she crafted the flowers beautifully. There were African daisies, different colors of zinnias and cosmos, and in the center, towering over them all, a sunflower. I tried to help but gave up pretty quickly, limiting my contribution to filling the vases with water and packing them carefully into the boxes she had bought. When she was finished arranging them 2 hours later, we were finished and had flowers sitting all over the house. The smell was almost overpowering, especially if you mixed it with the pizza dinner. Done showers over, we sat on the couch, she with a glass of wine, me with a ginger ale. I think I've been pretty good at holding it in, but what in the world are you going to do with all these flowers? I'm not going to do anything with them. We are going to the hospital tomorrow and give them out, starting in the children's ward. Please say you'll help me. Not how I envisioned spending my Sunday, but the look she gave me made me feel like I'd be kicking a puppy if I said no. All right, she just glowed, there was no other way to describe it. She slid into my arms and snuggled for a while. I dozed off and she woke me, saying it was time for bed. I stumbled into my bedroom, not realizing she was right behind me. She slipped off her robe and twirled, making the translucent gown she had on rise. I got a microscopic view of 2 very nice cheeks before it settled down. Bed, we're going to need our sleep. It took me a little while to calm down enough to go to sleep. She snuggled, feeling the iron bar between us before giving me a nice kiss. She was out in seconds. It took me an hour to get to sleep. We went to church again the next morning, and I saw JY in a pretty serious discussion with the preacher. I was wondering what it was about when he handed her a paper. After lunch at the country club, where I had to listen to a 20-minute conversation in French, we were home. Jen teared up a little when I pulled Steve's truck out of the shed I kept it in, but was smiling by the time we got the flowers loaded. There were 25 vases, and I figured we'd just dump them at the nurse's station and leave. Wrong, wrong, wrong. There were also a bunch of stuffed toys, and I wondered what that was about. 3 nurses and Jan met us at the door, rushing out to help carry the flowers and animals in, giggling and talking a mile a minute. Jen pulled out the list the preacher had given her and started prioritizing. After the first stop, I was ready to go home. She was 5 years old, and she was dying, the nurse told us. She liked horses, and JY had a unicorn among the stuffed animals, so she got that out for her. There was no one in the room when we got there apparently. The parents were divorced because of the pressure of the situation and wouldn't be in the same room at the same time. So, she went long periods without any company at all. I was beyond furious when I heard that. If she was my child, you couldn't have blown me out of her room with 5 pounds of C4. Despite the bald head and the frail frame, the child was all smiles that she got visitors, along with a unicorn and flowers. JY told her that I'd raised them, and she asked if she could come see them when she got out. We both promised she would be more than welcome. I got up abruptly and walked back to the station, taking a bouquet apart and weaving a garland for her head, something my mother had taught me when I wasn't much more than the child's age. Jen looked up sharply when I walked back in, but smiled through tears at the reaction of the child when I snugged the garland around her head. We had to take pictures of her with both of us, and a nurse who came in to check her vitals told her she would print a couple out for her to enjoy. I still have one of me holding her carefully while she snuggled to both of us. I took it out once in a while after she passed and remembered we were able to give her at least one good day. We were planning to spend about 15 minutes with her before moving on, but we stayed an hour until her medication put her to sleep. Jen took 10 minutes redoing the makeup that had run from her tears. I just wiped my eyes and told the nurses I had allergies. We gave out 9 more bouquets to children, then switched to senior citizens. The child ripped my heart out, but the sight of those old people, many of them alone in this world, weeping with gratitude to be seen as a person, broke it into little pieces. One 94-year-old woman cried like a baby while she snuggled the stuffed sheep she had picked, then hugged us as hard as her frail body would allow. I thought we were done until Jan brought us to the nursery. The sight of all those babies finally caused JY to melt, coming into my arms and weeping great tears, no doubt thinking of Steve and their missed opportunities. When she finally recovered, Janice asked if she'd like to come and volunteer rocking babies who had no one. She said it did the children good to be held and it helped with their development. Why don't the parents rock them? Some of these children get left here by their mothers unable to care for them. Others may have a single mother with dependence issues. Some are born and have to go through drug withdrawal immediately. Those are the ones that really need to be held, JY said. She would be there Monday morning. It was a quiet ride home. Jen got into sweats, dragged a pillow and blanket to the sectional, and demanded I snuggle with her. Emotionally wrung out, we both fell asleep, waking up just in time for a light supper and back to bed. I didn't even comment when she shrugged out of her sweats and climbed into bed in just her panties. We went right back to sleep. She made sure she was up early enough to make me breakfast, a breakfast she made while wearing just a t-shirt and panties. It was a great view and brightened my day considerably. I thought about it as I ate my bagged lunch. I knew she was sending me a message, but I was on the fence. A love affair with her would be stuff dreams are made of, but I had to be realistic. She was worth millions, a lot of millions. I made 62 grand on a good year and lived in a manufactured house. It was a nice house, and I'd upgraded it quite a bit, but it would never be the mansion she was used to. I was pretty sure if we lived together as a couple, cracks would start to appear, and I couldn't get over her history of just disappearing if things got stressed. I would never be able to handle that. I decided the best thing we could do was air everything out, my expectations and fears as well as hers. That plan did not get a chance to work because when I got home, it was to a very pissed off Jen. Your girlfriend came by today. I don't know who was more surprised, her or me. She apparently got in from her business trip a little early and came by to surprise you. Well, surprise! I took a deep breath. Jen, why are you so upset? Did you think I lived like a monk, pining for something I could never have? I live in the real world, honey. I can't just disappear if things don't suit me and just pop up months later like I was never gone, let alone expect people to accept it. Shock did not even describe the look on her face. I told you I was mourning and trying to get my life back on track. Yes, it was rude and thoughtless to disappear on you and my friends, but I have a habit of not thinking things through. If I had, I would have never married Steve or met you. That shocked me. I thought they were deeply in love. She saw the look on my face. That didn't come out right. I did love Steve a lot, but I figured out pretty quick that Steve was a pretty selfish guy. Yes, he loved me, but he loved the thought of his beautiful ex-model wife on his arm at business functions just as much. I was his validation that he had made it in some way. I made it very clear I wanted a family, but after being put off for 2 years, I realized I was going to have to force the issue. I found out something interesting while I was going through his papers after he died. He'd had a vasectomy a year after we married. I suspect he was going to get tested to show me he was shooting blanks and maybe I would forget the whole thing. It wouldn't have worked because I remembered how paranoid he was about precautions while we dated. After I read that, I realized that we'd have eventually drifted apart. I had to think about that for a bit. I knew Steve was selfish, but I didn't think he was that selfish. I am so sorry, Jen, for you and the fact that a man who was my friend would do something like that. She sighed. What are you going to do about your girlfriend? I'm going to call her, then I'll probably go see her. She's been gone on a training course for 3 months. It was in England. She's a lot like you in many ways. Oh, she's pretty, but she'll never be as beautiful as you. She's a successful woman making it in a male-dominated profession. She's the very first female the company thought enough of to send into that course. She'll probably make VP in 3 or 4 years if she stays on track. I'll bet she works for peanuts while the men make a killing. Actually, she makes more than most and almost twice as much or better a year than I do now. If you'll excuse me, I need to shower and change. I'll probably be late getting home. Do you remember how to set the security system? Her reply was to flounce out to her car and drive away. Angie had more than a few ruffled feathers. How long has she been staying with you? A couple of weeks. I figure another 2 or 3, and she'll be gone. I'm like a touchstone to her, plus I look a lot like her deceased husband. Is she looking for a clone? I know who she is. Anyone who's ever read a fashion magazine knows who she is. I figured she'd be wrinkled and grey by now, but she looks better than my baby sister, and she's 23. Are you sleeping with her? I think I dodged that bullet pretty well. I'm not having sex with her, if that's what you're asking. Bet she's loaded. How much is she worth? I have no idea. I've never asked, and she's never said. How much are you worth? That was kind of a sore subject. I had a rough idea what she made, and her house was a McMansion. She liked showing me off at business functions, dressed in one of Steve's expensive suits, but she didn't like what I did. She was in banking and told me flat out I needed to quit my job and go into making custom furniture. She even had the financing lined up. I shocked her when I said no. I just wasn't comfortable with that. My parents had struggled all their lives and ended up with nothing. I didn't want that to happen to me. Our relationship was strained for a while but got back on track just before she went on her trip. She wisely changed the subject, and we went out to dinner, then back to her house for a serious round of make-up sex, trying to catch up from our time apart. It was so exhausting I stayed the night. When I got home, Jen was gone. I just shrugged. I would miss her. It was 8 weeks before I saw her again, at a funeral. A funeral for the little girl who had cancer. The cruel disease finally defeated her. Her mother said she died in her sleep. I didn't know she had passed until a little white-haired lady showed up at my door. Hi, you don't know me, but you know my granddaughter, Julie. May I have a minute of your time? I brought her in, sat her on the couch, fetched her a glass of tea and a piece of cake. She smiled at the old-time hospitality. Your parents must have raised you right, Jamie. They tried. She had the saddest smile I'd ever seen. I think most of it stuck. I've got bad news, son. Julie passed last night in her sleep. She knew she was going to die, and she begged me to ask you something. If she did, her last request in this world was to ask if you'd weave a band of flowers for her to wear to heaven. It hit me hard. I developed a habit of harvesting the flowers once a week and taking them to the hospital where many of the nurses would arrange them. I'd always stop to see Julie, and she'd always smile at me. She had a few toys around, and it seemed she loved puzzles. One day, I stopped to see her, but she was having a treatment. I knew she'd be worn out by the time she got back, so I didn't stay. A unicorn was on her dresser, propped up on a bouquet of my flowers. I took about 8 pictures with my cell phone. The next day, I went to a professional photographer and told him what I wanted. He picked the best 2 photos and blended them, changing the focus slightly until the flowers seemed to glow. He printed it off on special stock. I spent every minute after I got home from work the next week making a puzzle that fit into the custom frame I'd built. It had 80 pieces, and I assembled them into the frame, carefully gluing the photo to the pieces. It was a big puzzle for a 5-year-old, but the pieces were pretty big, and she seemed pretty smart for her age. When it was set, I took a utility knife and carefully separated every piece, cutting from the back to ensure crisp lines. After that, I gave them a light coat of acrylic to bind them even harder, then I assembled it a couple of times to make sure everything fit. I gave it to her in a big bag with no instructions. It took her 3 days to figure it out. Her mother told me she cried with joy when she saw what the puzzle was. Now she was gone. Just before she left, her grandmother handed me an envelope. She wanted you to have this. I wrote it out for her, and she copied it in her own hand. Something to remember her by. I'd remained pretty stoic while she was there, but when I was alone and opened the note, I'm not ashamed to say I cried the tears of the broken-hearted. You could just barely make out the childish scroll, but the words hit me hard. Mr. Jamie, thank you and Miss Jin for the flowers and the unicorn and the puzzle. You are my friends, and I love you. Julie. The next morning, I stripped about 2/3 of my flower beds, saving the very best for her garland. The rest, I took to a florist friend of mine and had him arrange the flowers as her casket spray, my last chance to give her flowers. I went to visitation that night. Julie lay like a little angel in a white dress, my garland around her bald head. I thought I held it together pretty well until I noticed the purple horn just below her right hand. It was her unicorn, the left turned up so I could see it was a disc of a sunflower, the centerpiece in her puzzle. Many thought I was the father, the way I cried. Janice was there. She came up and hugged me, then led me gently away. There in the corner was the mother, wrapped up in the arms of someone who looked familiar. She looked up and smiled at me through her tears. It was Jen. She motioned for me to sit on the other side of the mother, and when she saw who it was, she transferred her tears to my shoulder. Jen got up quietly and walked away. I didn't see her again that night. I was a pallbearer, one of 4. It was devastatingly, heartbreakingly light, as only the casket burying the dreams of a child could be. The spray made from my flowers covered the whole casket. By now, many of her mother's friends knew they were from me, and they all wanted to thank me. I think I got more hugs that day than at any time in my life. I sat with the other pallbearers during the funeral, but at the graveside service, I stood in the back. The preacher spoke of the love of God and how all things happened for a reason, before he commended her soul to her Maker. I just stood numb. When a hand slipped into mine and another took my arm, I automatically wrapped that arm around the person hugging me. Looking down at the grief-racked face of Jen, she didn't look like a supermodel just then, but she looked more human than at any other time I'd ever seen her. I saw the expensive casket, the way the service was put together, and knew who paid for the funeral. Julie's mom was barely scraping by, and her father had disappeared. I walked Jen to my truck when they started lowering the casket, shoving a big bunch of flowers in her hand. This is our last chance to give her flowers, I said, coming. We walked back slowly. Janice, Sandy, Melody, and 3 of her nurses waited, and after each was given a handful of flowers, we dropped them into the grave, one by one, until they were gone. Goodbye, Julie. Heaven is a better place now that you're in it. I hope you can run and play, and that it is fields of flowers with unicorns roaming in them. I said it quietly, but most heard me, and it set off a fresh round of tears. 3 days later, I got home to find a Mercedes SUV in my drive. I wondered who among my friends could afford one of those when Jen got out, looking as timid as I'd ever seen her. Can I come in? I let her in, and she automatically went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. As it brewed, she sat with an expression I couldn't read. I need to say some things, and I need for you not to interrupt until I'm done, all right? I just nodded. First, let me apologize for disappearing again. I had this whole fantasy constructed around us. I thought I'd walk back into your life, and you'd welcome me with open arms, and we'd live happily ever after. Then the reality hit me. I disappeared, and you hadn't stopped living your life. You had responsibilities, you had a life, you had a girlfriend. Boy, that one hit me hard. You guys still seeing each other? No, why? It wasn't over me, was it? I'll call her and explain if it would help. It wasn't over you, not directly, but you did have an impact. The reason we broke up was she decided I wasn't successful enough for her. She'd gotten a huge promotion and was making 3 times what I was. She wanted me to quit my job and go into custom furniture and was willing to finance my startup if I gave her 60% of the business. I politely declined, and things started going downhill. I hear she's dating a VP now. I hope she's happy. I'm so sorry, I said. I have to say, you don't seem too broken up. Oh, I was sad. We'd been together for 6 months, but I wasn't looking for the long-term commitment she wanted, especially since it had to be on her terms. So, you're single now? Yes, good. I hereby state my intent of being your girlfriend. You need to stop talking now and let me finish. I've thought about this a lot. We may not mesh, we may end up despising each other. I'm a lot spoiled. I've had everything I ever wanted handed to me since I was 19. When it happens to you that young, it warps your perspective of reality. It's one of the reasons I love you so much. You do it gently, but you don't put up with a lot of foolishness. If we were together, I have a feeling I'd be a lot better as a human being. She paused to gather her thoughts. I know my money doesn't exactly intimidate you, but it makes you uncomfortable. Yeah, I got lucky and made a bunch of money, then inherited a bunch more when Steve died. There's nothing I can do about it, and I don't intend to give it up. There's a lot we could do with that money. Raising children is the first thing that comes to my mind, but we could also be a boon to our community. There are people like you out there, people like Julie's mother, the preacher's son, others who could use a helping hand. We could be those hands. Curiosity got the better of me. Why do I need a helping hand? Your ex was right about one thing. You do need to go into the furniture business. You're a good construction foreman, I'm sure, but you're an artist with a piece of wood. People with money would be thrilled to own one of your pieces. Do you have any idea how much a custom bedroom suite like you built for your future daughter would bring? I checked around, showed pictures to some people who were qualified to give an opinion. How much would you say you have in that suite in man-hours and materials? I did some rough calculations. The materials weren't that much, it was the man-hours. I probably spent 100 hours on it, about $3,500, she gave a soft laugh. I talked to a woman who purchased something similar, and she gave $10,000 for it. When she saw yours, she told me if you would build one for her, she'd give you $12,500. If you pushed it, she'd probably go $15,000. Still don't think you could make a living doing what you love? Wow. I did some rough calculations. If I had enough orders, I could gross around $120,000 to $150,000 a year based on a 40-hour week. Almost $80,000 would be profit. Not bad. Best of all, I'd still be working with my hands, she could see I was interested. Here's the deal. I'll give you a loan of $150,000. I'll give you a 10-year term at 4.5%, the current prime rate. This is a strictly business deal, and I'm confident you won't default. Regardless of whether we end up together, I believe in your talent, she sighed, got up, and rinsed her coffee cup. There, I've stated my intentions. It's all up to you now. Call me if you're interested. With a quick kiss on the cheek, she was out the door. I noticed she had left a packet on the table, paperwork for the loan with a note to have a lawyer look it over. On top of it was her new phone number. I thought about it for about 3 days and called her. I could hear the excitement in her voice. Hi, I replied. I've been thinking about our discussion, and I think we should meet. If you're not busy Saturday, could you come by the house, say around 10? I think she was a little disappointed that I wasn't asking her out on a romantic date, but she agreed instantly. I told her to wear jeans and comfortable shoes. She was there 10 minutes early and found me in the garden with buckets of fresh flowers around me. I gave her a quick kiss, which surprised her, then told her to get to work arranging the flowers. The season was almost over, but we managed to fill 20 vases. I caught her humming as she worked and grinned. I surprised her when I pulled my new Ford pickup out of the shed. Where's Steve's truck? On the used lot of the Ford dealership. If this is going to be a brand new start, I don't need his ghost hovering over us. She jumped into my arms and kissed me. I didn't see that coming. Very nice kiss. Anyway, she was even more surprised when I backed the truck up to my shop. I have to load a few things, and we'll be ready to go. I put the 3 rockers I'd finished on the back, careful to put padding between them. To her credit, she didn't ask, just helped me strap them down. We rode in silence until we were almost there. Jan still talking to me. She told me about your volunteering in the nursery, rocking the babies. She also asked me to look at a couple of the rockers because they were getting a little rickety. They were worn out, and the thought of you falling to the ground with a baby in your arms didn't sit well with me. So, I made these. She didn't say anything, just locked down on my hand and started humming again. Jan, her 3 nurses, and 2 maintenance men were waiting at the door. The maintenance men and I each took a chair and went to the nursery where we unwrapped them and set them up. The men promised me they would throw the old rockers in the dumpster. Jan and Jin made a list and delivered the flowers. We were there 4 hours. I had a little surprise for her. Sarah, the vertically challenged woman I'd made a rocker for, had just had her baby. Jen was enthralled when the diminutive woman showed up, obviously pregnant. The chair was for her to rock her baby in. Sarah was a living doll, a blonde with blue eyes, and she looked like a pixie. Her husband was 6 feet 1 inch and was pretty sure she was responsible for the sun rising every day. She sat down, got a dreamy look on her face as she rocked and stroked her tummy. Finally getting up, she walked over to a step stool I had in the shop and stood on it. "Get your bum over here, Jamie." "I want to thank you," Jen giggled as she still had to pull me down slightly to give me a big kiss. "There, I needed to do that. I'll send you a picture of me and the baby on this chair when we take her home from the hospital. Look for 2 more photos over the years. We decided pretty early we want 3. Every one of them is going to hear the story of how Uncle Jamie built this chair for us." I took Jen down to see her, and they hugged as Jen gushed over the pictures. "We're going down to the nursery now. Jamie made 3 rockers for the volunteers, and I intend to stress test every one." Sarah smiled and asked the nurse if she'd make sure Jen got to rock her daughter. The nurse smiled back and said something could be arranged. When we got to the nursery, Jin and Janice immediately sat down. Janice gave me a pointed look and told me to get my bum in the 3rd chair. 3 nurses came out immediately and put a baby in our arms. I didn't get to object. Suddenly, I had a small bundle of crying humanity in my arms. Janice laughed while Jin and the nurses grinned. "Rock him, Jamie, and talk to him. The motion and the sound of your voice should calm him down," so I did. I talked about his future, how he could be anything he wanted to be, and how much his parents were going to love him. I talked about Little League, video games, even girls. When it was time, he stopped crying, sighed twice, and went to sleep. I looked up to see the other 2 rockers motionless and the nurses in a cluster before us, tears leaking. Way too much estrogen, I suspect. My little man was asleep, and they took him from me. My arms felt suddenly very empty. Jen didn't say a word on the way home, and I liked the silence, so I didn't break it. When we got back to the house, she looked at me. "What now?" "Well, I think we've done our civic duties for the day. How about a nice dinner and a night at the barn? I wouldn't mind a little dancing to end the day. I'll pick you up at 7 o'clock on the dot." With a quick kiss, she was out of the truck and gone. I piddled around for the rest of the afternoon, thinking. Was there a future here? Would she ever miss her old life? Would I offend her sometime down the road and watch her disappear again? Would the money get in the way? Was it worth it to try? Of course it was. She had been my dream woman since the day I met her. I didn't get a chance to get out. She came bouncing down the steps before I was in park. Tight jeans, western shirt, red boots, and a hat to match them. She slid in giggling, "I can't wait. I've wanted to do this again since the last time you took me." I tried to talk Steve into going once, but he said it was beneath our dignity. Boy, did he get an earful. I asked him since when did having fun become undignified? Then I asked him how he could describe his fishing trips as dignified when he came home in dirty clothes smelling like fish and bait. I asked if thought his business associates would approve, and he got pissed. I almost went by myself. I tried calling you, but you were out on a date. Things were pretty tense for a while around the house. Well, I expect you to have a ball. I want you to keep me and a few more cowboys gasping for breath as we try to keep up with you. Let your hair down, shake that hot rump like you're trying to make it come off, and have a good time. She slid over and gave me a loud kiss right on the ear. It rang for 3 miles. It was déjà vu all over again when we pulled into the parking lot. In my truck, I'd gotten all the bells and whistles, and it was a 4-wheel drive hunk of gleaming chrome and shiny paint. Then Jen got out, and once again, everyone forgot what vehicle we'd arrived in. When we met up with my friends, it was like we had just seen them last week. Barb was there with her new husband, and they hugged like long-lost sisters while she showed her pictures of her wedding. She must have taken our advice to heart. The guy was super nice, successful, and totally in love. Barb told Janice when he went to the bathroom that she had told him all about her past when he asked her to marry him. He just stared at me long enough to make me nervous before he spoke. You over that now? It's all in the past. I told him told him how much I loved him, and that I'd sign any kind of prenup he wanted. Well, then, good enough. Want to set a date now? She was crying by now. Best of all, my kids love him, especially the oldest boy. The fathers of my other 2 are still in their lives, but he has just walked away. When my man isn't working, that boy is his shadow. When he got back, Jen gave him a big kiss, then patted his cheek. That was for being the man Barb needed. I see many happy years ahead for you. He glowed. Thank you, I'll dance at your next wedding. Jen looked at him funny, and I had to explain it was an old Southern saying that indicated gratitude, and she grinned. Keep your dancing shoes shined, I'm hoping you'll be needing them soon. The group cheered, and I looked at her. Well, it seems she had declared her intentions to the world regardless. We had a great time. Jen danced with most guys from our group, but every time the band did a slow tune, she had me on the floor, rubbing against me until I was hard as a rock. Then she'd give an extra push, giggle, and back off. When we left, her well-put-together look was history. Her shirt was sweat-soaked with the tails out, and her hair hung in limp ringlets around her face. She'd given up on her makeup and had washed it off. I thought she looked like one sexy mess. I grinned, thinking about how her fashion friends would react if they could see her now. She saw the grin. What are you grinning about? How hot you look right now. It must have been a good answer because she snuggled as closely as she could in the truck and didn't let any space get between us until we were in her drive. She knew I wanted to go slow, so she didn't invite me in. We did manage to steam the cab of the truck up like teenagers making out for about 20 minutes. I got my first intentional feel of her firm jugs. Jen had the classic model's body, tall, thin, with one on the smaller side, still felt great. When we finally came up for air, she popped the pearl snaps of her shirt open. She hopped out of the truck and strutted into the house, turning at the last second and holding her shirt open, giving me one more look. I could hear her laughing as she closed her door. She was banging on my door at 7 the next morning. I stumbled to the door, and before I could speak, she shot past me. Shower, get presentable. I'll make breakfast, and then you're taking me fishing. I want to see what the attraction is. I got myself together and hooked the boat up while she finished breakfast. She asked about 1,000 questions while I tried to eat. I finally held up my hand. Jen, honey, wait until we get on the water. That way, I won't have to answer the same question twice. She stopped talking instantly. It wasn't until we were in the truck that I realized I'd called her honey. I got the boat into the water and tied it to the dock, then we went to the bait shop for worms. I was going to start her out slowly. I also picked up some soft drinks and water for the cooler. I eased out until I was past the no-wake zone and opened her up. Steve had picked a really good boat, mostly from the suggestions I'd given him. Jen stood beside me, laughing, with the wind in her face. When we got to the little cove I picked, cutting the engine and using the trolling motor. I put us about 20 foot out from a dead pine that had fallen into the water, knowing the fish would use it for shelter. I took a standard rig and walked her through everything I was doing, teaching her how to tie a hook to the line, how much weight she'd need for the size cork she would be using, and then showed her how to put the worm on the hook. If she was grossed out, she never showed it. I'm going to cast it now, watch me. I flipped the rod, and the cork landed a couple of feet from the tree. I handed it to her, telling her to watch the cork. If it goes under, pull back with a steady pressure and reel. Make sure you keep the tension on the line to keep the fish from spitting the hook out. Then I sat back and watched. You're not going to fish? I'm not here to fish. I'm here to teach you how to fish. Are you watching your cork? I asked. See how it's heading for the tree? Don't let it have enough line to make it, or it will tangle your hook. As soon as it runs out of line, it'll go under. That's exactly what happened. Jen squealed as the rod bent, reeling as I had told her. 3 minutes later, I used the net to scoop up a really nice bluegill, easily a pound. Well done, JY. That's a good-sized fish for the species, and they're really good eating. Will you fix it for me? Sure, but here's a better idea. Why don't you catch enough for both of us? We worked the cove for the next hour, moving slowly along the bank. She caught for more bluegill, but only one was big enough to keep. We were getting ready to leave the cove to try another place, and she wanted one more cast at the tree she'd been practicing. We had to cut her line once when she tangled in a tree, and her first couple of casts went maybe 10 feet, but she was getting progressively better. Her cast was perfect, landing about a foot from the point of the tree. The cork went under instantly, and Jen almost screamed when the rod went double. She fought the fish for 10 minutes while I hovered with the net. I got it just as it spit the hook out and tossed it aboard. She'd caught a bass, a nice one that went 2.5 pounds on the scales. She asked if it was edible, and when she found out it went into the live well. We worked another cove, hitting a school of bluegill, and she added 3 more nice ones to the pile. By then, it was getting close to noon, so we stopped. They don't bite well when it's too hot. We'd have to come back late in the evening to catch more. Can we? Well, sure, but do you want to go all the way home and then come back? No, I'd like to hang out on the lake. You can teach me how to drive the boat. I made her make a few laps in a big cove to get her used to handling it, explaining the rules of the road to her. Once we were in the main channel, I let her go a little faster. An hour later, we were zipping around like she'd been driving a boat for years. She pouted when I made her slow down and go back to the marina. I explained it to her, if we don't get back pretty soon, we'll be using the trolling motor, we're almost out of gas. She pulled up to the pump like she had been doing it forever, and the attendant secured it so he could fill it up. For another 20, he parked it in a slip for us while we went to lunch. The marina had a pretty good grill, and we inhaled a couple of burgers, then sat and enjoyed the air conditioning for a bit. We were getting looks, but I had gotten used to that. Jen had on Daisy Dukes and a cute crop top, her hair was back in the messy bun she seemed to favor. I think one woman recognized her but didn't say anything. I could hear the discussion in her head, that's Jen Foster, nah, it couldn't be. What would a supermodel like her be doing in this little grill in the middle of nowhere with such an average-looking guy? She's still hot though, that is one lucky guy. I totally agreed. I nearly had a heart attack when she stood on the dock and wiggled out of her shorts and top, showing a very nice bikini. It was tiny but not vulgar, if that makes any sense. Everyone, and I mean everyone, thought she looked good. The gas attendant bent over so far around the pump to get a better look at her that he overbalanced and ended up in the water. Jen never missed anything and had a big smirk on her face. Then she totally blew their minds by giving me a scorcher of a kiss before getting on the boat. Better let me drive, honey, you look a little out of it. We zipped up and down the lake for an hour before she gave me the wheel. Take us somewhere private, baby. I took her to the mouth of the lake and into a little cove I had discovered by accident. Trees hung over the entrance, and you had to crouch down, but once you cleared them, there was a beautiful little cove with a strip of white sand on the left side. I bumped the nose into the sand, jumping out and securing the boat to a big limb. It wasn't long until she had a couple of towels spread out. She laid down and undid her top, tossing it to the side. Rub me down, honey, she said. I did, it was one of the hottest experiences of my life. I did her back and legs, and she insisted I do her bottom. Her cheeks were mostly bare, and it was impossible to keep my hands from shaking. It didn't help any when she thrust those buns up, filling my hands. When I was done, she casually rolled over, and I was like a deer in the headlights, staring at her perfect little jugs. She giggled, "Finish the job. Usually, I don't have the bottoms on. We're in a secluded space, honey, and the boat is between us and the entrance. We'll hear someone coming well before they will be able to see us," I said. I rubbed her down. I worked my way down her tummy, admiring her smooth skin. I skipped the good parts and rubbed her legs, starting at her toes and ended up at the top of her thighs. "Do the rest, please." "No, if I get that far, I won't be able to stop," I replied. She sighed as she rubbed my chest. "Would that be a bad thing, making love to your girlfriend on a sandy little beach?" "It's just us, baby, I know part of you wants to." I gave her a scorcher of a kiss and stood, sliding my board shorts down. I had just gotten them past my knees when I heard a giggle. I yanked my shorts up while Jen scrambled to get her top on. Two girls, late teens I'd say, came around the boat in a red canoe. They grinned at us. "Sorry to disturb you. This is such a pretty place, I wanted to show it to my friend." "We'll leave now," one of the girls said. They seemed as embarrassed as we were, and Jen smiled. "You're here now, come on and enjoy the sand with us. If you're thirsty, we have sodas and water." I had slipped into the water, glad it was a little cool. I climbed into the boat and came out with a Coke and a water, along with a few snacks. Jen talked to them for half an hour, charming them until they pretty much told her their life stories. They were so absorbed with Jen, they almost forgot I was there. Jen looked at me with an arched eyebrow, and I grabbed a rod and started working the cove, walking away from them. I managed to catch a couple of nice bass and another fat gill before returning. Jen was holding them as they cried on her shoulders. We left them and returned to the main channel. We fished until it was almost dark. Jen caught a lot of fish, and we had a pretty full live well when we hit the landing. I had her back the truck up to secure the boat, and she did really well for her first time. She insisted on helping me clean the fish before she left. Of course, there was a pretty lengthy make-out session before she got in her car. I thought a lot about it while I was at work. She was sitting on my steps when I got home. I needed to get her a key, she was there for her fish dinner. I walked her through how to make tartar sauce, slow, and showed her how to make hush puppies. I rolled the bluegill in seafood seasoning after dipping them in an egg and milk bath. I let them set while I did homemade French fries, then dropped them in my fryer, waiting until they popped back to the top, golden brown. The base I pan-fried in bacon grease after rolling the fillet in seasoned cornmeal. We ate like pigs, cleaned up, put the dishes in the dishwasher, and snuggled down on the couch. The heavy meal had us out in minutes. I woke up at 1, pulling Jyn with me into the bedroom. She stripped down to her panties and climbed into bed, asleep in seconds. The smell of coffee woke me up. No one should be allowed to look as good as she did in the morning, I thought, watching her bustle about. "Get your shower, breakfast is almost ready." 20 minutes later, I was seated at the table, eating probably the best omelette I'd ever tasted. I asked what it was, and she rattled something off in French. I think the loose translation was delicious eggs. She was chattering happily, and I smiled as she was clearing the dishes. I asked her a question. "JY, while we wage slaves are at work, how do rich supermodels spend their days?" She stiffened, and I felt like I'd made a mistake. "Why does being one of the idle rich offend you?" she asked. "Not at all, but I suspect you're not one of those. You have too much energy, too much life in you to just sit around. If it bothers you, you don't have to talk about it." "I was just wondering what you did to keep from getting bored," I replied. Her smile came back. "I volunteer a lot. I usually spend a couple of hours at the hospital rocking babies. Everyone, and I mean everyone, wants to know where those rockers came from. They caught one husband trying to sneak one into his wife's room and another trying to sneak it out the door. I knew that was a soft jab at me for not signing the loan papers. She didn't nag, but she did bring it up now and then. What else? Well, I spend a few hours a week on the phone and computer with my financial advisors. I saw a few models who didn't watch their money, and it disappeared. It's why I have 3 separate advisors, she explained. It was pretty obvious she didn't want to remind me of how rich she was. Good thinking. I trust most of my friends, but only a few with money, I replied, breathing a sigh of relief. I also sit on a few boards, plus I work with the fire department. I stay pretty busy, but here lately, I think I've been a little slack in my main pursuit, she said. I walked right into it. What's that? The smirk told me everything, taking care of you, making you see I'm the only woman who will love you like you deserve. I think I'm making progress, but Jesus, you can be slow at times. I'm in love with you. Don't make me think I might have gotten it wrong. Look at the time. Don't talk, give me a nice kiss, and go to work. SHO now. I was out the door with the taste of her lips on mine. Dazed and confused, I was seriously ineffective at work. The guys caught on, and the teasing started. They shut up pretty quick when JYN stopped by just before lunch. Work just stopped as they watched JYN get out of her Mercedes. You forgot your cell phone, honey. How am I supposed to know what you'd like for dinner if I can't get in touch? Oh, and I brought you lunch. She handed me a paper bag and a thermos, gave me a kiss that almost melted my boots, steel toes and all, and was gone. The guys were quiet for a while, then they started. Damn, Jamie, you're fighting above your weight there, brother, another chimed in. Man, she looks just like that supermodel. What was her name? Jane? No, Jen something. You lucky scum sucker, one said. I grinned, yeah, she gets that a lot. My concrete guy chimed in, yeah, but she has a serious flaw. She must be dumb as a rock to be hooked up with you. The girl got vision problems? Did she ride the short bus at school? She's probably smarter than all of us put together. That wasn't a junker she was driving. She's hot, well off, and she likes to fish. She's my dream girl, I said. Even as the words came out of my mouth, I knew they were true. She was beyond my dream girl, she was my ultimate fantasy.